I am Dr. A. Ahmed Basha, Professor of Physiology, Chettinad Hospital and Research Institute. Today, I'll be speaking about circadian rhythm, suprachiasmatic nucleus, circadian sleep-wake disorder. The objectives of the today's presentation is: number one, introduction to circadian rhythm. Next, we are going to see about suprachiasmatic nucleus. Next, physiological basis of circadian rhythm. Next, circadian rhythm versus sleep-wake cycle and common circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. First, we move on to the introduction to circadian rhythm. What is circadian rhythm? Circadian rhythm is nothing but an endogenous oscillator which is present in our body system, which regulates the variations in physiological process in a 24-hour cycle. Circadian in Latin, which means about a day. There are several physiological variations. Few are variations in body temperature cycle. That is, in a 24 hours day-night cycle, the body temperature, for example, in the early morning, it is less when compared to the evening temperature. It doesn't mean the temperature crosses beyond the normal limits. For example, the temperature normal is 37 degrees centigrade in a healthy individual. But it is not exactly 37 in the entire day. There is a range, approximately some 36.2 to 37.1 or 2. So in this range, there is a fluctuation in 24 hours day-night cycle. That is why the temperature is little lower in the early morning and it is higher in the evening. This variation is due to circadian rhythm. Similarly, hormonal secretion, for example, melatonin secretion is peak in the from night to early morning 3 to 4 a.m. So all these variation together is circadian rhythm variations. So when we read about circadian rhythm, there are two other types of biological rhythm. One is ultradian and infradian. Because only if we know about the ultradian and the infradian, we can better understand what is circadian. Beyond this, there are several other terminologies, but here I have mentioned only the major terminologies. So ultradian, what is ultradian? Ultradian is nothing but several physiological variations, that is cycles that repeat several times within 24 hours. That is shorter than a day, night. Example, heartbeat. The normal heart rate is 72 beats per minute, but it is not 72 beats minute for the entire day. There is a variation. It is ranges. For example, it can go up to 60 or 70 to even up to 100, which is the range. So this fluctuation is example for ultradian rhythm, that is shorter than a day. Circadian, as I mentioned earlier, which is roughly 24 hours. It is an endogenous rhythm which entrain to light-dark cycle. A classical example, sleep-wake cycle, melatonin release are the example for circadian rhythm. Next is infradian, which is longer than a day, that is more than 24 hours. Rhythms with the periods longer than 24 hours. Classical example is menstrual cycle. So every time it is a cyclic response which is longer than a day. So now we know what is circadian. Circadian is a endogenous oscillator which exists in a 24 hours, roughly around 24 hours, that is physiological variations. But this activity of the circadian clock, that is the internal time, can be modified by the external cues. They are called as zigzagers. There are several zigzagers are there. Common zigzagers are environmental light, temperature, eating or drinking behavior, etc. Okay. Next, we move on to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So the name itself, it indicates it is a nucleus, a small paired structure of about 20,000 neurons located in the anterior hypothalamus. Why the name suprachiasmatic nucleus? Because it is above the optic chiasma, that is above the optic chiasma, hence the name suprachiasmatic. These neurons express clock genes that generate self-sustained oscillation for a period of 24 hours. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, if you see, it contains two regions or two parts. The number one is core region, where it receives direct light input from the eyes. Next region is shell region, which generate rhythmic output signals to the rest of the brain and body. So these two parts play a role in controlling the circadian rhythm. So what are the functions of suprachiasmatic nucleus? Number one, light detection and entrainment. That is, in the eye, in the retina, there are specialized cell called as retinal ganglionic cell with the melanopsin pigment, which send a signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus via a retinohypothalamic tract. So which allows the suprachiasmatic nucleus to synchronize with the internal rhythm with the external light-dark cycle. So now first function is light detection and entrainment. Next, suprachiasmatic nucleus act as a central clock for circadian rhythm, that is, it is a master clock. So that is central clock. Similarly, almost every tissue in our body, liver, lung, etc., has its own molecular clock, they are peripheral clock. This central clock coordinates with the peripheral clock, ensuring body systems are synchronized. So with this synchronization, it regulates the entire physiological rhythm like sleep-wake cycle, hormone secretion, example melatonin, metabolism and body temperature, mood, alertness and cognitive functions. So what are the output pathways from the suprachiasmatic nucleus? It sends signals pathway to the pineal gland, that is suprachiasmatic nucleus regulates melatonin production via sympathetic innervation. So melatonin synthesis and release are highest around 3 to 4 am in the dark phase, and any light exposure, even a few seconds of light exposure during the dark phase, inhibits melatonin synthesis and release. Melatonin hormone helps in synchronization of the day and night cyclic physiological process like eating and fasting, sleep and wakefulness, and other neuroendocrine ultradian rhythm. Further, through autonomic nervous system, it influences metabolism, cardiovascular rhythm. Further, it also influence hormonal axis, that is, it impacts cortisol rhythm through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Next, we are going to see about physiological basis of circadian rhythm. Number one, central clock, which I have seen earlier, suprachiasmatic nucleus. That is, suprachiasmatic nucleus act as a master clock, which is a central pacemaker of circadian rhythm. It synchronizes body internal biological rhythm roughly for a period of 24 hours with the external light-dark cycle. So, central clock is suprachiasmatic nucleus. In this central clock, the circadian rhythm are driven by a transcription translation feedback loop of clock genes. So, these clock genes are classified into positive limb components and negative limb components. Positive factors. So the positive factor genes are clock and BMAL1. Negative factors are period 1, 2 and 3 cryptochrome 1 and 2 genes. So it is driven by clock and BMAL transcription factors. This clock and BMAL1 complex activates the transcription of period and cryptochrome genes. The translated period and cryptochrome proteins which accumulates and form a complex, and which in turn through feedback inhibition it inhibit clock and BMAL activity, generating an oscillation with approximately for a period of 24 hours. Adding to this primary feedback loop, there are additional secondary loop which involve RV and ERB alpha and ROR genes. The ultimate purpose of this secondary loop is it fine-tunes the rhythmic gene expression. In addition to this, this interconnected loop regulate the expression of clock controlled genes. Okay. Next, we move on to the peripheral clock. So, we read what is circadian rhythm, what is suprachiasmatic nucleus, what is the molecular clock. Now, peripheral clock. So, peripheral clock is similar to the central clock, but here it present in almost every organ, liver, kidney, heart, pancreas, etc. They regulate local metabolic and physiological process. However, suprachiasmatic nucleus keeps them synchronized with the external cues. Light entrainment. So, I told external cue. So, light is the strong environmental cue. Through specialized retinal ganglionic cell with the melanopsin pigment and through retinohypothalamic tract reaches the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the master circadian clock, entrainment of central circadian rhythm, suprachiasmatic nucleus, which in turn sent signals to the peripheral clock through hormonal and neuronal pathway. Ultimately, it causes synchronization of peripheral clocks in organ and tissue. So, the entire step is in a coordinated physiological process which act by the coordination of central clock and peripheral clock. The output due to that coordination is changes in sleep-wake cycle, variations in hormonal secretions like cortisol, variations in body temperature, and it also influences metabolism, that is rhythmic control of glucose tolerance, lipid metabolism. Further fluctuation occurs in the cardiovascular activity, that is changes in blood pressure and heart rate follows the circadian rhythm. This entire circadian rhythm which is influenced by the environmental cues. So, environmental and behavioral influence, their zejibers, light is the strongest zejiber. However, feeding time, activity, other social cues also entrain circadian rhythm. Any changes, any misalignment, that is like for example night shift workers or waking up purposefully for a longer night or jet lag, that is traveling across a time zone, leads to the sleep disturbances, metabolic imbalance and long-term health risk. So, summary, if I summarize, circadian rhythm arises from suprachiasmatic nucleus master clock and molecular transcription translation feedback loop, and it coordinates with the peripheral clock. So, ultimately it regulates the essential physiological process like sleep, hormones, metabolism and temperature. Next, we move on to the circadian rhythm and sleep-wake cycle. Because the circadian rhythm only causes sleep-wake cycle, so what is the relation? That is, sleep-wake cycle is an expression of circadian rhythm and it is shaped by two processes. One is process C, the other one is process S. Process C, which determines whether you feel alert or sleepy. Process S means which builds the sleep pressure the longer you stay awake. That is, circadian rhythm tells the body when it is biologically day or night. Suprachiasmatic nucleus sends signals to the pineal gland to release melatonin at night, which in turn it promotes sleep. However, cortisol peaks in the morning, which boosts wakefulness. Thus, circadian rhythm and sleep pressure align to produce consolidated sleep at night and wakefulness during the day. If you see the graph, process S, which is blue in color, sleep pressure builds longer you are awake. So this is a midnight, 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m. Blue color is the process. Yes, you can see sleep pressure builds longer you awake, then drops during the night. Similarly, process C, which sets the timing of alertness and sleepiness. So ultimately, together, due to these two processes, the sleep-wake cycle is regulated so that you stay alert in a day and sleep at night. Last, we move on to what are the sleep-wake disorders. That is, conditions where a person's internal circadian clock is misaligned with the external environment day-night cycle or with the social occupational demands. It causes circadian sleep-wake disorders. Actually, the problem is not with the sleep itself, but with the timing of the sleep. Types of the circadian sleep-wake disorder. Number 1, delayed sleep-wake phase disorder. Here, sleep occurs much later than normal, that is 2 to 3 a.m. and wake up late in the morning, which is common in adolescent and young adults. The other disorder is advanced sleep-wake phase disorder. Here, sleep occurs much earlier, 7 to 8 p.m. and wake up at 3 to 4 a.m., which is common in older adults. The other types of sleep-wake disorders are irregular sleep-wake rhythm disorder. Here, there is no clear sleep pattern, fragmented naps throughout the 24 hours, often seen in neuroendocrine or neurodegenerative disorders like dementia, Alzheimer's. Non-24-hour sleep-wake rhythm disorder. Here, every day, that is sleep-wake cycle gradually shifts each day, which is commonly seen in totally blind individuals where there is no light perception. Next disorder is shift work disorder, which occurs when there is a rotatory work schedule or more of night shifts, which is conflict to the natural circadian rhythm, leads to insomnia or more of daytime sleepiness and poor alertness. The last type of circadian wake disorders is jet lag disorder. Here, temporary misalignment after a rapid travel across various time zones. The symptoms include insomnia, daytime sleepiness, poor concentration, and digestive issues. So, what are these symptoms, common symptoms of sleep-wake disorders? Generally, it may lead to insomnia or excessive daytime sleepiness, fatigue, poor concentration and mood changes, impaired performance, and frequent headache. Then, how these sleep-wake disorders can be managed? It can be managed with the application of light therapy, bright light therapy or LED therapy, or drug intake like melatonin supplements can be given, or else based on the time duration therapeutical management can be done, that is chronotherapy. Maintaining a good sleep hygiene helps to overcome the sleep-wake disorder, especially for the shift workers. Planned nap, that is intermittent sleep and light exposure management can be done to avoid or to lessen the circadian sleep-wake disorder. So with this, I am concluding. So to summarize, circadian rhythm is a natural endogenous oscillator which is present in a 24-hour cycle where physiological variation occur. It is mainly controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, where molecular clock and peripheral clock interfere and coordinate in a synchronized manner. Ultimately, it maintains the normal physiological process. Here, our point of interest, sleep-wake cycle, is maintained by the circadian rhythm. So, whenever there is a issue in maintaining the circadian rhythm, it may lead to circadian sleep-wake disorder. It can be managed based on the symptom and based on the cause and based on the type. it can be medically managed. Thank you.